Welcome back to the ZERT Coffee and Chaos podcast, a show where we talk about anything and everything. Nope, I fucked that up. Start again. Welcome back to the ZERT Coffee and Chaos podcast, a show where we talk about anything and everything relating to what it means to be a survivalist and a prepared individual in today's society. I'm your host, Chris Bartigone, ZP002. Back with me, my co-host, Jamie Franks. Jamie, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here. You gave me an excuse to take a shower and change my clothes. I've been sick all week, so I've literally been wearing the same clothes for, I think this would have been the sixth day of me wearing the exact same clothes. So I got up, cleaned myself up, and changed my clothes. And so if I sound weird, it's because I've been sick all week, and if I look weird, it's just because I'm a weird looking person, I guess.
Careful, I have the ability to add banners to this thing now, so I might just start adding weird banners of excuse Jamie's appearance. Folks, welcome back to the Coffee and Chaos podcast. Obviously, we really appreciate you guys joining us every week, whether you are listening to us only on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcasts, or you are waiting for the video version to pop up on YouTube. We try and get those out within a couple of days after the show drops on just your podcast channels, but sometimes that does not happen. If you are watching this one today, you'll see that I am wearing the ZERT Death Blossom party shirt. Some exciting news. Probably by the time you listen to this, the pre-order for the black version and the white version have hit the website. If you have not seen that, or you do not know that yet, and you're listening to this, then head over to the website and you can probably still order yours. They are in production. They probably start production, or by the time you listen or watch this, it'll already have started production. So I'm excited for those because the other little tidbit is there might be another figure happening this year that will be wearing one of those shirts. Anyway, exciting news, folks. But as you all know, and I know that I've gone on some camping trips, and I know Paul's gone on some camping trips as of late this year, but Jamie, you have not done any camping yet this year?
This year I have not so far. Yeah.
Okay. Do you get out there a lot?
I used to. I used to go camping. I mean, I would say prior to like the last couple of years, I would say I would probably spend 30 days and nights or so per year in a tent. But awesome. The last, it's not really for any particular reason, but I got back from my last deployment actually almost exactly 2 years ago. What is this, June? So yeah, so June of 2022 or July of 2022, I got back from my last deployment. And it just so happens, like just with my daughter's schedule and my schedule and stuff like that, I just haven't done much camping in the last maybe 18 months. But prior to that, I would describe myself as a pretty avid outdoorsman and spent a lot of time in camping in the outdoors and stuff.
Awesome. But it's really one of my happy places, right? And I know that it's just car camping, and it's in a state forest or whatever, and you have a cleared out spot, and there's a fire ring ready to go, and you got neighbors all over the place, but it's still getting away from the couch, the TV, the chair, the house, the bullshit. And
that is
and
true.
I love it.
And like the girl I used to date, the girl that I was dating 2 years ago, my thing is like I love camping, and I like getting away from civilization. So I don't really like camping in a quote unquote campsite.
Yeah.
I like going off into national park or state park areas where you can kind of, there obviously there's guidelines and boundaries and rules and a few restrictions, but
yeah,
out here in the western part of the country, it's actually pretty easy to find like I said, state parks and national parks, or state nature preserves, and out here we have regional parks and things like that. But a lot of them are just wide open expanses of wilderness where, again, within reason, within a few guidelines, you can pretty much camp anywhere you want. You don't have to camp in a designated marked campsite with the next. I'm camped in campsite A1 and the person next to me is camped in campsite B2 and stuff like that. But the girl I dated a couple of years ago, she loved going out and just camping, like you said, even if it was just in a campground, in a campsite. And I used to kind of always cross my arms and look down my nose, and I don't want to do that. I want to go out into the. But a lot of times it's like, it's kind of in the same vein as people that think of some excuse to like not go to the gym. It's kind of the same thing. It's I don't like working out at that gym. Well, okay, maybe not, but going and doing a workout is better than not going and doing a workout. So, you know, even if you are camping in a campsite and a campground with somebody next to you, I would still say that that's better than not going.
Of course.
And it's still,
I mean,
lends value to shaking out your gear, testing out your gear, like you said, getting 100%. Out of the house, getting off your phone, getting out from in front of the TV, all that stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, you don't have a microwave, you don't have a fridge. I mean, you do have to plan a little bit. You have to do a little bit of food prep.
I do have a fridge, sucker, and it's freaking game changer.
You bring a fridge camping?
I'm not joking. Even I have the ARB. They make ARB. If people don't know, ARB is a big name like in the off-road world. They make like off-road accessories and bumpers and things like that, but they do make a camping refrigerator, and it's a freaking game changer.
Well, but now you're talking when you bring your trailer set up, right?
I do have it set up. So if I'm doing any type of vehicle dependent camping or off-roading or anything like that, yes, I can put the fridge in my trailer. I also have it where I can put the fridge in my truck or in the back of my Subaru Outback, which is surprisingly off-road capable. But it's a 48 quart refrigerator, which is also like that's also the size of your like average cooler. But when you think about it, probably 2/3 of the space in your cooler has to be taken up by ice. And then you run into the problem of constantly having to change out your ice and drain the water out and stuff sloshing around and moving around. And the refrigerator eliminates all that. There are a couple extra considerations you have to factor in as far as like power drain on the vehicle and stuff like that you have to compensate for. But I never have to worry about getting ice. I'm able to use like that 48 quarts of space is all actual usable space that's not taken up by ice. There's a refrigerator portion and there's a small little freezer portion. So I can, if I want to keep things frozen, I can, and then everything else just kind of stays at a refrigerated temperature. But yeah, obviously when I'm doing like backpacking style camping, I'm not rucking around with a refrigerator on my back. But anytime I'm doing any type of vehicle dependent camping, car camping out of my Subaru or like off-roading in my Tacoma or whatever, yes, I do. Jamie comes with a refrigerator. And it's awesome.
That is, I mean, that's an interesting kind of way to do it. Because, you know, sure, if you bring up a good point about the ice, and we'll get into that in a second, but you bring up a pretty interesting fact where, you know, if you are car camping, yes, you can bring this little refrigerator thing and keep your stuff cold, but it does rely on some kind of power. So, you know, I guess there is that. Sure, you're going to keep your vehicle, you're going to keep it plugged into your vehicle the entire time. Is your vehicle close enough to where your campsite is? Because there's a campsite that I went to earlier this year, which it's about a 50-yard walk from where you park your car to where you go and set up camp. Not going to work. The one that I was just at, there was probably a 20-yard, and you know, you're not going to run an extension cord. And if you are, like, again, that's, you know, then might as well just get a camper at that point, and just go live in the camper. But you bring up a good point about the ice, and I'm still shaking that out. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to do that. Can you just go get an ice bag and bring the ice bag with you, or bring the bag of ice and use that, and then, you know, as it melts, you get more ice? Sure, you can. Could you get
for a long time I did when I was still rolling with a cooler, I would just buy the like the Aquafina or Evian like water bottles, like the little 12-ounce water bottles, and I would freeze them, and then I would put that in the cooler as the ice, and that way, as it melts, it just turns into a bottle of water that you can then drink.
Yeah.
And it doesn't turn into a sloshy mess. That was the best solution I found for when I was still rolling with a cooler. But the refrigerator is awesome. It has, like, the one I have has a feature. You can preset a limit, so if it drains your vehicle battery down to a certain voltage, it'll shut itself off.
Yeah.
But like in my Tacoma, I have a dual battery setup, so it's not an issue at all with my Tacoma. And then in my Subaru, I wanted to do a dual battery setup, but I can't figure out how to make it work. And so I just did a really a high end battery upgrade, and that has been enough, honestly. Like, for I've been using my refrigerator in the Subaru for
and this
about
is the
3
one
years. That's not the exact one I have.
Okay.
No, mine.
Okay. I mean, just looking at
that's
these,
very similar, but that's not the exact one I have.
Just looking at these right here, and for those of you that are not watching and just listening, we did a little Google search and found the cooler / fridge thing that Jamie uses instead of it. Hey, listen, I think that's a pretty wild way to do it. It's interesting, definitely something I will look at. They're pricey, but I guess if you
the
think
ARB
about it,
50 Classic Series 2 is the one that I have.
Did you say ARB or ER?
ARB, Alpha Romeo
ARB.
Bravo.
Yeah. Got it.
But it's the I did misspeak though, because you've got the 47 quart one pulled up right there. Mine is actually the 50 quart one, so it is slightly different. But.
So obviously that is a way to do this. We're obviously talking about car camping. You bring a vehicle, you have all the space in the world in your vehicle to bring everything you possibly can. That involves a cot that you can set up with pillows and the whole deal. But it doesn't, you bring your shelter with you. You bring your tent, and it's usually because you're not having to worry about space. It's one of the, I use an instant up tent, Gazelle T4. It's heavy, it's big. You literally take it out of the bag, you open the thing up, and you pop out all of the sides, pop up the top, stake it down, and you're done. It's heavy. It's a heavy tent. But it's easy, I started looking at campers recently, and you go from like this little teardrop camper, which is basically just a hardened tent, and it's got like a little kitchen area that you pop up, and then to big campers, to ones that you pull behind, and there's motorhomes and whatnot. But today, folks, we're going to talk about what you do when you don't have a tent. And we're going to talk about some different types of shelters. I know that you've watched the Outdoor Boys channel. I have as well. I'm sure we've all seen those. I don't know what nationality they are, but those guys that are in like the Congo, and they've got like a stick, and they go and they just start carving out this entire trench, and the next thing you know, they're making like a house with like red clay and water, and they're piping in water. I used to get lost in those videos, and they're long. They're time lapsed, so who knows how many days, but it's like a 45-minute video, and the next thing you know, this guy has literally taken he's made a hut and a swimming pool with a stick, and you're like, what just happened here? So we want to talk a little bit about shelters today, and whether you decide to really test your might, if you will, and you decide to walk into the woods with a couple of tools and a blanket, and then you're going to build a shelter and fire, or you're going to bring some tools and you're going to build like a little shelter in the woods. there's many different ways to do it. There's a lot of different styles of shelters, but it all will depend on A, your ability, B, where you are, C, what the weather is going to be like, and I guess if you want to test your skills. But
yeah, so I've referenced this before. I almost said something about it a second ago. Like in my, I'm 45, so in my adult life, basically, like kind of since like age, I'll say like age 28, 29 and above, ever since then, most of the camping I have done, I call it vehicle dependent camping, not car camping, because to me car camping sounds like I'm packing up the family truckster and just going down to the campground on the edge of town that's that's right beside a 7-Eleven or whatever, and just popping up a tent and roasting marshmallows for the night. I do like to go like far out into the back country, which does require going off grid and stuff like we talked about. But in my younger days, I did do a lot of what they called like fast and light, minimalist, like backpacking style camping, like the type of camping you would do if you're hiking the Pacific Crest Trail or the Appalachian Trail or whatever like that. I never did the entire PCT, but one of my friends and I, we would like every couple of months we would do the PCT in sections, because being in the military, I don't have 9 months off of work where I can just quit my job and go hike the PCT from Mexico to Canada, so we would do little sections at a time. But it was funny to us, and I'm sure we were funny to those people. But there's like a subsect of people within the camping world that are like ultra minimalist, that are like literally like counting and trying to figure out how to reduce every single little ounce that they can. And one of the things, like, I mean, I grew up as a Cub Scout and a Boy Scout. I never did go Eagle Scout, but I grew up scouting and camping and hunting and all that stuff. And
failure.
Yeah.
Why didn't you finish it?
Because I discovered women, but is the short answer. But anyway, like I guess, sorry, I always grew up camping in some sort of tent. And like when I was first starting out as my family wasn't rich. We were very, very, very blue collar, middle class. And so a lot of my camping gear when I was a kid was like honestly like military surplus gear that I would use as my camping gear. And back in the day, like pretty much all the way up through the 1980s, really until the 1990s, like a standard loadout for like an Army soldier or a Marine was each individual soldier got a tent half. So you got half of a tent, and then you would buddy up and you could put your two tent halves together and make a pup tent. But if it was just you by yourself, you had what you need to make a lean-to. And so like that's what I grew up with as far as shelter goes. But fast forwarding, like I said, when I was a younger adult, doing the PCT in little sections, like some of the people that are out there, like really, like to me, like camping without some sort of shelter or some sort of tent, to me that's like weird, and honestly, like it makes me a little uncomfortable. But there's some people.
Wait, are you talking about like when that dude Luke is just in the middle of the Arctic over there and he throws like a blanket over him and just sleeps by the fire? That like that type of situation?
And that's where I'm going. Like I would encounter these people on the PCT that would look at us and they'd be like, look at these tent people, like, sorry, like I don't want to just sleep on the ground, but like a lot of people do. So I said all that to say, like, you really don't, it's all like exactly like you said, it's all dependent on conditions, it's all dependent on location, it's all dependent on what you're comfortable with and what your skill level is and all that.
Right.
But
and length of stay. Like, how long are you going to do this?
Right. But in all the survival training I've ever received, I've talked about this many, many times on the show, like your 4 priorities of survival in order are shelter, water, fire, food. So a lot of people, I think a lot of untrained people or people that don't know any better, think that water is your first priority. But like in every training I've ever received, shelter is the number one priority, not water, because exposure to the elements, when you start getting into extremes like extreme heat or extreme cold or wet, that will kill you faster than going without water. You can go without water for 3 days, but maybe one night in sub-zero temperatures will kill you.
Right, which is weird that water would come before fire. And I guess it really, again, depends on what the weather is. Do you need a fire when it's 85 degrees? No. Do you need a fire to boil water? Yes.
Well, and if you're to be fair to the training I've received, if you're in a combat situation, it doesn't matter what the conditions are. It doesn't matter how cold it is. You can't have a fire because that's going to give your position away. So,
yeah, exactly. So let's go back to some deciding factors here, right? So length of stay.
Ooh.
What?
Oh, go ahead. But I mean, any of our regular listeners should know I love a good acronym or rule of thumb. So I have one of those that was trained into my brain many years ago that pertains to this, but I'll let you finish. So.
Okay. So length of stay, right? If you're going to go into the woods for a weekend, do you need to spend, if you're going into the woods for 48 hours, do you need to spend 12 and a half hours cutting down trees and building a shelter and creating clay and whatnot? No, let's be realistic here. But if you want to create, if you've got some acreage and you want to build a little shelter deep into your property, I think that's a great idea. But I think the length of the stay that you're going to do, if you're going to go and walk the Appalachian Trail or whatever, what is the trail you keep referring to?
The PCT, the Pacific Crest Trail. It goes from Mexico to Canada.
There you go. So Appalachian Trail, that goes from Georgia to Maine, the PCT, which goes from Mexico to where?
It goes all the way from Mexico all the way up to Canada.
To Canada. The one that Paul hiked, the C&O Canal. Again, those are hikes designed to, you keep moving and you just kind of get a tent and you camp for the night. But some of these shelters, again, if you're going for numerous nights and you want to bed down, like the folks on the show alone, right? They're going to be there for 100 days. Makes sense to create a permanent-ish type shelter that's going to provide you sustainable length of time to remove yourself from the elements.
Yeah, and this also, like, if we have any new listeners, this really is part of a series where we have gone into like each one of these individual survival skills. We've talked about purifying water, for just camping, recreation, and for survival situations. We've talked about building fire. We've talked about food preparation, how to source food, how to preserve food, all that kind of stuff. So we saved the best for last because, again, this should be your first priority. But in all those other ones, all those other survival skill episodes, we really talk about, like, if you are in a survival situation and not a recreational situation, you should never, in any survival situation, you should never make a decision and then stay married to it. Like, you always
Right.
need to preserve the option to pivot or change your mind, or but for the most part, you kind of need to decide if you're going to wait for rescue, meaning you're going to stay in place, or you're going to self-rescue, which means you're going to go on the move. And so that definitely does factor into how much time and effort and how many calories you want to burn building your shelter. But then even that, whether you want to go on the move, attempting to rescue yourself, or ultimately to walk out of your situation, or if you want to stay put and wait for rescue, you kind of split that in half. So with your shelter building, even if you're going to build your shelter, even if you're going to decide to do what I've always called self-rescue, meaning walk out, can you source materials or whatever from either what you have on you or what you can forage, can you build your shelter in such a way that you can, either partially or completely break it down and carry it with you, and then just keep essentially like reusing the same shelter, in a different location. And a tent is a good example of that. You take it down, you move it with you, you put it back up, and now you have the same shelter as you move place to place to place. But I think typically speaking, for most people, most of the time, in most situations, it would probably be in your best interest to try to shelter in place unless there's some reason why you can't, and wait to be rescued, because assuming you're in a survival situation implies that you've been in some sort of emergency situation, and it also kind of assumes that people will be looking for you, and you're going to be harder to find if you're on the move. You'll be easier to find if you're staying in place. And so if you are staying in place, then your consideration for your shelter should be continually improving the shelter, because this is one of the things that's been proven to be true time and time again in many real life survival like scenarios and case studies. If you can keep your mind occupied, you have like your chances of survival, increase exponentially. So if you can, like they do in Alone, like setting aside time of your day every day to improving your shelter, always improving, improving. It keeps your mind and body occupied, and improves your chances for survival. But yeah, but length of stay in a survival situation, I would translate that to sheltering in place, or am I going on the move? So
right. And so that I get, you really bring up a good point there. When we're talking about the shelter building, folks, are you doing this to add another tool to your toolbox? The ability to build a shelter is probably a skill set you should learn. Now, how you take that tool out of the toolbox and use it will depend on the situation that you find yourself in. Like Jamie just said, if it's a survival situation because your plane crashed, your car broke down, whatever the case may be, you may not have the tools to do some of these things. And that's something that we'll get into here when we get a little bit further down about, if you're just going to go learn this skill, which you should, then you can take it from, okay, I'm going to bring a DeWalt bag with a hammer and a saw and paracord and nails, and then start taking some of those tools away one at a time, to where you only go out with maybe two, and then you have to kind of manufacture your own hammer or lashing. But the other thing is, one of these things that's going to be kind of dependent on what shelter you build is the weather. If you're doing this in the summer, you're not going to have to worry about snowfall and whatnot. Like if you're doing this towards October, November, that you're dealing with colder temperatures. You could deal with snow, you could deal with rain, you could deal with a mix of both. And those are going to weigh heavily on what shelter you decide to build and how you decide to build it. If you're dealing with rain and snow, you probably don't want to build something with a tarp as the roof and have a flat roof, when you have weight coming down on top of it. But again, this is all, weather is kind of known and unknown, right? You know that you're in the summer, and you know that you may have to deal with some cooler rain, but that's kind of it.
So yeah, I'll just throw this out there really quickly, because a lot of the things you just said just I don't know, reminded me of it. There's this book that I read when I was a kid, and it's called Hatchet. I think I may have referenced it on this show before. But the book is about this little kid. His parents are divorced, and he lives with his mom most of the time, like in Los Angeles or somewhere. And then his dad works in Alaska, and so in the summers he goes to stay with his dad in Alaska. And so It's this little kid. He's 12 years old, and like his mom gave him like a hatchet for his birthday present, that's where the title of the book comes from.
Got it.
And he's flying up to Alaska in this like bush plane it's just him and the pilot in this plane, and he's going up to meet his dad. And the bush pilot has a heart attack and crashes the plane.
Oh.
And so now the kid has to survive on his own with nothing but the hatchet. And it's a really good book. I read it when I was a kid, and then when I have my daughter, she's 12 now. A couple of years ago, I bought it. I found a copy of it on Amazon literally for like 2 cents, and because it's an old book.
Yeah.
And read it to my daughter, and I've recommended it to several of my friends. But like in the book, like when the crash first happens, that he's faced with this decision of how to build a shelter, what type of shelter to build, all that kind of stuff. And really, like when we're talking about what materials to use and what kind of roof do you put on, and how do you what tools do you need, and what can you make out of whatever's just in your surroundings and stuff like that. You're really only limited by your imagination. I mean, this is why like it's important to like let kids build pillow forts and stuff when they're a kid, because like that honestly does translate into a survival skill when you're talking about shelter building. A 4-year-old kid looking around your living room for things to make a little tent or a fort out of. That really is the same thing we're talking about, just in an extreme survival situation, where you have to build a shelter for survival. So, I would say like the most, if you can't carry a tent around with you all the time in your pocket, I would say like the best 2 things to have, I guess, to prep yourself in the event that you had to build a shelter would be some 550 cord and a tarp. And that like those 2 things right there will get you by. And like that kind of goes back to what I was saying. Like when I was a Cub Scout, my gear was like kind of old Vietnam era military surplus gear, and that's basically what it was. But you hit on another point that I wanted to emphasize is you referred to it as like building a skill set. And I can make this example like the most basic of, even if you're just a weekend warrior that wants to go out and go camping with your family, in a campground, that's not necessarily deep in the wilderness off the grid. You get that brand new tent from REI or Walmart or Target, wherever you get your tent from. It's a great practice to go out and set it up in your backyard before you actually head out to go camping, and make sure all the parts are there. Make sure all the stakes are there. Make sure, like, because I've been in situations where I've been camping, and like we set up the tent, we have our fire, we turn in for the night, and then in the middle of the night, a terrible storm comes up. And most tents come with what are called guy lines.
Yep.
But most of them are pretty shitty, because the tent manufacturers know that like most people aren't even going to use these or even know how to use them.
Right.
So they are provided, but they suck. And at like 2 a.m, when a bad storm pops up out of nowhere, that's a bad time to try to figure out how to set up your guy lines and all that stuff. So setting up your tent ahead of time in your backyard, like inventorying all the parts, making sure you understand the instructions, make sure nothing's missing, making sure nothing's bent, make sure nothing's broken. Because a lot of tents, even if we're just talking about, like I said, the most basic example of a tent that you bought at Target, a lot of tents, the parts aren't really interchangeable. Like these, whatever tent you buy, your tent poles may be proprietary to that tent. So if you wait until you're actually out at your campsite trying to set up this tent, and something's bent, something's broken, something's missing, it's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to either replace that part or improvise that part. So even as the most basic example of you're just going out for a weekend to camp with your family, and you're going to use a tent, take that tent out at home, inventory all the parts, practice setting it up, practice taking it down, practice putting it back in its bag that it comes in, make sure everything's there. If it comes with guy lines, probably throw them in the trash and replace them with 550 cord. That's what I do with all my tents, and then set it up in a way that's easy. It makes it easy for you in case you do need to get up at 2 a.m. and set up your guy lines and things like that. But that can go all the way down to practicing skills like Chris said, like just taking your multi-tool or whatever knife you carry for your EDC or whatever, and just going into your backyard or like going into the woods by your house and just give yourself an hour and just see like how much of a shelter or what kind of shelter can I build in an hour with just what I have here or whatever. So
now I want to go back to something you said, and kind of a little hack. I think it's pretty common knowledge that the bag your sleeping bag comes in, your tent comes in, is all larger than it needs to be and probably weighs more than it needs to be. A good sleeping bag, a good down sleeping bag can literally fit in a compression sack and shrink down to about this big when you're done with it. The same for a tent. What makes a tent so cumbersome is the poles, right? So I've taken my smaller tent when I do have a hike through tent. I've taken that out of and separated it from the rest of the stuff in the bag. So the tent poles will go just in the pack on the outside, and the tent itself will get folded up and put into a compression sack and made as small as possible to go inside, obviously, the pack. Again, just a little piece of advice, a little life hack that I learned. So.
Well, and we kicked around the idea a few weeks ago of doing an episode all about camping hacks, and one of the times when I was about to say one of the times we were doing the little sections of the PCT, but actually every time. But one time there was 3 of us, so we had to change the tent that we took because I had this little tiny super ultralight. Also, I still have it. Ultralight 2-person backpacking tent. But even in that case, if there's 2 of you, split the tent apart. Like just because everything goes back in this nice single bag that fits the tent itself and the poles and the rain fly and the lines and all that stuff in it, you don't have to carry it that way. So like, because we were carrying everything on our backs,
right,
and like you just said, we were through hiking point to point, one person can carry the poles and one person can carry the actual tent part of the tent and all that stuff. So that's also something you can think about. And then the one time we did it with 3 people and we had to carry a slightly larger tent, we did the same thing. Like one person carried the fly, one person like the fly and like a pole, one person carried like 2 of the poles, and then one person carried the main body of the tent. So you can split that weight up between people if you're having to carry the stuff on your back.
Yeah.
But so how you build your shelter, and I mean, that's honestly, like, go ahead.
Well, hold on, but to kind of lead you right into that, when it comes to different types of shelters, I guess the first thing you need to decide is what type of shelter are you going to build? Are you going to do a lean-to? Are you going to do a round lodge, a teepee? Are you going to do a rock shelter, a debris hut? I mean, there are different types of shelters that you can find, and if you Google types of bushcraft shelters, that's what you will get. A tarp shelter, like you just said, one of the most important things you could probably keep in your kit is a tarp and 550 cord. That will solve some of your problems right off the bat. But I think one of the deciding factors of what type of shelter you build is based on your geography, where you are in the woods. I mean, can you find an area that has some sort of rock face or some overhang ledge of rock? So
I think what you're
that
referring to is a natural shelter.
Natural shelter, right? So, but I think for the sake of this episode, we'll just stick with. I guess we can stick with wood. Like we're going to build a wooden shelter.
Well, so like I said, I teased it before that there's in the survival training I've had, there's a obviously Jamie has a rule of thumb or an acronym to help you remember. But yes, there are survival handbooks, but the chances of you actually having a survival handbook in your pocket when you find yourself in a survival situation, I'm going to say that's going to be an astronomically low probability. So deciding on what type of shelter to build. Should I build a lean-to? Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I build it out of this material or that material? It's going to go back to your inner 4-year-old, building
Right.
a fort in the living room. It's going to depend on whatever you have, how much time you have. But unfortunately, like, even though there are survival manuals, there's not one that I'm aware of where you're standing there and you look around and go, oh, it's June and I'm in the desert and this is the type of stuff that's around me. So, the book tells me to flip to page 41 and this will have desert shelters in June and what I should build. Like, that doesn't really exist. You just kind of, you got to know your skill set and your, when I say tools, I mean physical tools and the tools in your toolbox, like that you have in your brain.
Right.
And then, but in my training, they taught us the 5 W's of site selection. So if you are in a survival situation, your number one priority is shelter, not water. Your number one priority is shelter. So when selecting where and what type of shelter to build, your 5 W's are water, meaning your proximity to water, meaning and there's a couple of factors with the, I'll just do the 5 W's and then we'll go through each one of them. So your 5 W's are water, wood, wind and weather is the same one. So water, wood, wind and weather, wildlife, and widowmakers is the last one.
Widowmaker. Okay.
Yeah. So water, when they say water, they're talking about both your proximity to water, meaning how far do I have to go to get water and bring it back to the site. But also you need to consider, like, I love the show Survivor Man, and even Les Stroud as a, like, absolute certified expert in all types of bushcraft and survival. There was one of the episodes where he thought he had set up his shelter far enough away from the river, but a storm happened. The storm wasn't even where he was. The storm happened like upriver, several miles or whatever, and it was such that it caused the river to swell, and the water actually overtook his shelter site. So that's also needs to be considered when you're talking about your proximity to water. If you're camping somewhere where it's very swampy or wet, like you're in a low elevation area, and you build a shelter right here and then you lay down on the ground overnight, or is water going to come up through the ground and make you wet? Or are you in an environment where the entire area is standing water, like in the Everglades or something like that, where you need to build your shelter up off the ground or up off the water? So proximity to water is a consideration for many different reasons, but I was always taught that's the first thing you need to consider when selecting your site. And also, if you're near a standing body of water, that can also mean insects and mosquitoes and things. So
definitely don't want that.
Yep. And then wood. So like Chris has already alluded to, wood is going to be I would say, probably most common, best to work with natural, what's the word, material to work with for building a shelter, because you can cut down limbs and you can make,
and it's dual purpose.
Yep. So it's wood to actually build a structure or a shelter, or, like I said, supports or whatever to get you up off the ground, but also wood for your fire. I was always taught in a survival situation, if you can have a fire, if you're building a fire, once you think you have enough wood, double it, because it takes a lot of wood to keep a fire going all the way through the night, if you actually are using the fire for heat. But you need to consider, is there wood near your shelter site, or are you having to travel a long distance to gather wood and then carry it back? You want to try to avoid that. Wind and weather. So when you're building a shelter, wind is going to be your number one enemy, so to speak. That's going to be that's going to be the most common thing that you need to shelter yourself from. You need to get yourself out of the wind. You need to if you're constructing a shelter, you want the shelter to be out of the wind. And then, like Chris said, weather. Do I need to worry about having a waterproof roof, or am I sheltering myself from rain or snow? That factors into your site selection, and this also factors into, can I find a natural shelter? Can I find something that's can I find some trees that have fallen over and just lay under those, and that can be my shelter, or a cave. There was something you put in the show notes about understanding, like, having at least some sort of basic level of understanding of different types of rock and different types of earth and stuff like that. And that can be important, because if you find a natural shelter with like a rocky overhang and you don't fully understand what kind of rock that is, and you think to yourself like, oh, I'm just gonna, instead of building a shelter, constructing a shelter, I'm gonna hang out under this rocky outcropping, and I'm gonna build a fire under here, and it's gonna be awesome, until that fire heats up the rock and it fractures, and a 6-ton boulder breaks away and kills you while you're trying to survive. That'll injure survival trip. But
the other side to that rock is, obviously, if you are building a fire inside your shelter and you're building it out of wood, you're going to run a little bit of a risk there. If you're building a shelter out of rock, well, that's going to also do a little bit more to retain the heat in there and whatnot. So there's pros and cons to both.
Absolutely. That's why I said, actually, you're the one that said it. You're the one that put it in the show notes. It's good to have a basic understanding of that, because the right type of rock you can build a fire under, and it'll actually absorb the heat and then radiate the heat back out to you, or back out on you.
Right.
So the next W is wildlife. So that one again, are you building your shelter in a place where there's game trails and wildlife is going to be walking through? Again, to use an example that you could see on the show Survivor Man, he built his shelter I think it was one of the episodes where he was up. He was either up in like the northern part of Canada or in Alaska, I don't remember, but it was like a tundra environment, and he built his shelter, and he was near water, and he was near wood, and he was out of the wind and everything. But then he realized, like, just kind of like around the bend, around the corner, was an area where like bears were coming to catch fish, and he could tell that like the bears had been coming there because there's like all these like torn apart like fish carcasses and stuff. And so obviously that's going to draw more wildlife, and that could be a good thing, but typically that's going to be a bad thing if you're trying to do survival. You don't want to have to battle the wildlife. And then the other thing to think about where wildlife can factor in, if you are finding a natural shelter like a cave or a rocky outcropping, or you're going to crawl under these trees for the night, you need to make sure there's not already some wildlife in there. So you do need to build if you can, if you know how to build a fire specifically that produces smoke. Like typically when we think of building a campfire, we don't want smoke, right? Because you want to enjoy the fire. But if you can build a fire in a way to make it produce smoke, you can smoke out that little natural shelter, and that'll run off any bugs or snakes or any little critters that might be hiding in there waiting for you to get in there. And then the last thing is widow makers. An example of that is one I've already mentioned, where if you think you're going to start a fire under this rocky outcropping and it's the wrong kind of rock, it can fracture off and kill you. So that's the type of thing that's a widow maker. A lot of people find, I guess, comfort or security if you build a shelter kind of like in the middle of like a clump of trees or something like that, because you don't feel as exposed. If you build your shelter kind of like out in a clearing or whatever, then you do feel exposed, and it makes people feel like uneasy or less secure. But that actually is the better choice. You don't want to build your shelter somewhere where either rocks can fall on you, tree limbs can fall on you, an actual tree that like the entire tree itself could fall over in a storm on you. If you're camping or surviving somewhere like at a high elevation where there's a snowpack, are you building your shelter somewhere that's with an avalanche danger.
Right.
Is your like one of the outdoor boys? Did you watch the one where he like carves out, like he builds this like underground? He finds a place where there had
Yeah.
been an avalanche already, and then he like basically carves out like this underground snow house.
Yeah.
And so all of those things factor in, but that's what I mean by widow makers. Are you building your shelter in a place where something could fall and come and kill you while you're sleeping in your shelter that you just built?
Yeah. We're sitting here and we're talking about building shelters, and when you think about it, when you need some sort of tools, and we talked about kind of in the getting to this little journey here is how to do that. If you're gonna test yourself, and like Jamie said, maybe you want to go right down to a multi-tool and see what you can do there. I would venture to say that in a situation where you're going to do this, you're going to actively try and perfect this skill. I think you're going to need, at minimum, 2 tools. One of them is a knife, and you should be carrying a knife all the time. And I think the other thing that you're going to need is a saw. A knife and a saw,
100%.
I think, are a must-have. Anything else you might be able to get away with. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but I have a kit, and I call it my Swift kit because shelter, water, fire, food. It's a small little survival kit that I made. Like it's to call it a bug out kit would be too generous, because it really is just the bare basics survival kit that covers. I built this small kit that covers my 4 priorities of survival. With what's in that kit, I can build a rough shelter. I have enough water to last for 24 hours, and I have I have a little water filtration and treatment little thing in there, so that I can purify more drinking water. There's a small fire building kit in there, and then I have we've talked before again about field stripping MREs. And so there's 2 field stripped MREs in there. So with this one little kit that's about this, I don't know, like if you took I'm trying to think of something that anybody can reference, like the pillow that you sleep on in your bed. If you took your pillow and like folded it in half, it's maybe that size or smaller. But it has everything I would need to build shelter, water, fire, food. And anyway, to your point, one of the things that is in there that is so value. I mean, it literally is worth its weight in gold in a survival situation, is a saw. People think people that don't know any better and have never tried, think that if you have like a hatchet or something that you can just like chop down a tree, and then once you chop down the tree, you can split the logs with your unless your last name is Bunyan, I don't think that's going to work out too well for you. A saw is a game changer. It's actually like the one I have, the ones that I've come to love are the brand name is Silky, Silky.
Yep.
And they're really good, and they come in many different sizes depending on what your your needs are. If you want it to be like a little survival kit saw, they make a smaller one, and they make ones that are freaking like huge.
That's what I have the big boy.
Yeah, I guess if you're going to earn your living by sawing things, like they have one for that. But anyway, the Silky one, the Silky is the brand, and then they have all the different models. But I have a Silky saw in my little Swift kit. That thing's worth its weight in gold. I have one in my main camping kit. Actually, I have 2 in my main camping kit as well. My daughter, just a little side story. We were camping in Grand Teton National Park a couple years ago, and it was like something you'd see on in a sitcom. It was like something you'd see on The Office or something like this. This middle-aged guy comes up in his Prius in the campsite. They weren't like right next to us, but they were close enough that we could kind of see them across there was like between our campsite and theirs, there was like a little clearing, and they were on the other side. And like homeboy thought he was just gonna take this big, huge log of wood and just like chop it with his hatchet. And it was getting cold, and it was starting to rain, and I was like watching, and like he was trying. I think it was his wife or girlfriend that he was with, but like his camping gear was like straight up like a bunch of crap that he bought at Target. And I watched him struggle for long enough. I watched him struggle for a few minutes. I think actually like I was cooking dinner and I just like kind of kept watching as he was struggling to, because he thought he was going to just use his hatchet to turn big wood into small wood, and it was not working.
No.
And I had 2 saws in my little car camping kit, and I brought one of them over to him and I showed him how to do it. And then you said a knife earlier. I would take a fixed blade knife and a saw over like an axe and a hatchet almost any day, because if you know how to use a fixed blade knife and you take like another piece of wood and they call it batoning.
Yep.
Or people call, I don't know, depending on what part of the country you're from, battening or batoning. And so I took the guy one of my saws and one of my smaller hatchets, and I showed him how to like use the saw to cut off a piece of wood and then use the hatchet, but don't swing it like Paul Bunyan, like just sit the hatchet on there and baton it and split the wood. And then I looked like a hero in front of my daughter, and I saved that dude's camping trip. But yeah, anyway, you mentioned having a saw. A saw is so worth it. So it's
just a
really valuable piece of kit.
And just to piggyback on what you just said about the knife over the hatchet and for batoning, I mean, you can use it for, obviously we talk about multi-purpose, right? I mean, if you cook a steak, well, now you need a knife. So you can use the same knife, by the way. You can produce feather sticks, you can produce kindling, you can take that, using a hatchet and chopping through wood and being a hammer instead of a scalpel. And what I mean by that is obviously hammer is just a blunt object, and just, but a scalpel you use for precision. You can take that knife and we've talked about this before, where you can get and just baton that through and get the smallest little pieces of kindling. But I think those 2 tools are the most important. You can produce other tools with those tools.
Yes.
You could produce a makeshift hammer. You could definitely produce some kind of shovel device from those, and fire, by the way. I mean,
and if you know what you're doing and a small town sheriff comes after you while you're camping, you can use your knife to basically take out his entire sheriff's department by making snares and traps and stakes. And,
you'd have to be a Green Beret, and you'd have to get hosed down first and steal a motorcycle.
The Green Beret part I was going to debate with you, but the hosing down is definitely mandatory.
Yeah. Right. And you'd have to have that same poncho and some rope, and you can make, and the knife has to have a compass ball on the end of it.
Did you ever have one?
Folks were talking about Rambo, and yes, I had one of those knives.
I mean, because it actually does pertain to this topic. When I must have been, I'll say I was probably 8 or 9, and my grandma got me one of those for Christmas, but it was like the quote unquote like made in Taiwan Rambo knife like you unscrew it had a compass and you unscrew the thing, and then like inside the handle was hollow, and it had matches, fishing line, like 2 little like key rings, because
hooks.
Fish hooks, because with the 2 little key rings it had like the little saw. The cable saw or whatever. What else did it have in it?
Folks, I don't know that those are a good saw option, by the way. We'll come back to saws in a second. And then the sheath had the little sharpening stone.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I feel like I'm forgetting something. I feel like there was something else in the handle. But anyway,
wasn't there some kind of, like you said, fishing line?
There was fishing line, fish hooks, matches. Mine had like back then I thought it was dumb, but now I realize like that's actually a good thing to have. But mine had like a little, like a Ziploc bag that had been like folded over and rolled up, and that was in there. So you just had like a plastic bag, which I talked about that in our survival kit episode. Like just having plastic is actually a good thing you can use for a ton of stuff. But I want to say matches, the 2 little key rings, the little cable saw, fishing line, fish hooks. I think it had a couple of fishing weights in there also, and the little plastic bag. You had the sharpening stone, the compass. Maybe that's it. But and then on the knife blade itself, one side was a knife, the other side was like a saw blade, and then and like a bottle opener or whatever, or can opener, also like machined into the blade. But anyway, I don't even think they have those anymore. But that'd be a fun YouTube video to like see like can you actually do anything with this
Yeah,
thing? But
I think that there's a guy out there that tests all these knives, all these different types of knives. I'm sure he's probably done that. Going back to the saw, we talked about the Silky Big Boy, which is just a folding saw. So it's got, you unfold it, it's got a big handle. You can go one hand, two hands on it, and it's just got a big straight blade.
it's folding, but it does have a locking mechanism. So
It does.
does lock into place. Yeah.
The other is more like the saw that they give you when you go cut down a Christmas tree, right? It is a bow saw, and they're also folding.
I've actually never had one of those. I know
I've never had one either, but it's the one that you see being used a lot. And I don't know if it's a better option. I don't know. I've never actually looked into it. But then the one we were just talking about is basically it's like a chainsaw blade, or and at the end of it has two hooks, two handles or whatnot, but you basically wrap it around a tree and you go back and forth, and that's what you use to cut things. Going back to your analogy of car camping, or going to the gym that you don't like, is having that better than not having anything at all? Well, sure. But if you have the option, just get the right equipment.
And I'll make the point that over my life of being in the outdoors and being a person that like loves all this stuff, and just being a person in general that just that is a little bit of a gear queer, and I love little gadgets and pieces of gear. I've probably had 10 like different versions of the type of saw you just described, and I've still never landed on a good one. Like when you said it, having one is better than nothing, I have found them to be so unreliable, or they break, or they just don't work, or you have to be a much stronger person than I am to use it, or whatever. Like I've found so many flaws with those things that I would almost go so far as to say it's better just to not even have. I would rather have nothing than to have
right.
that.
And I guess I was about to say yes, but you could use it to cut smaller limbs. But at that point,
maybe.
could you just use your, but I mean, at that point, if it's smaller limbs, could you just use your knife and just start cracking those things off?
I think
either
you
way,
and I talked before about, didn't we do an episode where we talked about like the subscription boxes and stuff?
Yes, we did.
Because
I think you had one in there.
Yep. When I think it was when I was subscribing to BattleBox for a little while, for about a year. I got like 2 different ones, and like one of them claims to be like the best one. But it's the kind that you said that's basically like a chainsaw blade with little T handles on each side, and it's not good. If you have the option, get one of the saws that we're talking about that we do recommend. The silky saws, or the like the bow type saws, even though I've just never had one because I just never have. There's not a reason why. But those hand pull saws, in my experience, like I said, I think I've probably had about 10 different ones, and I have so far not landed on one that I would recommend. So
and when I sit here and I think about what we've talked about and where we've gotten on the episode, while it seems like we've been talking for about an hour now, I actually don't feel like we have gotten through the entire subject. So this will probably be a part 1 to a second part series. What I would love to do is, I think what I want to do is try one of those saws, those bow saws.
I was going to say, if there's anybody listening that reps for a company that makes those things, prove me wrong, send me one, and I'll go try it out.
But back to the tools, and again, it's probably one of the most important things to building your shelter, because you're going to need to know how to do it with tools, right? And we always talk about skills trump gear. In this one, I don't know that you're going to be able to do it without at least one piece of gear, whether that's a knife, whether that's a saw, but or obviously both, or a combination of both. I do think you need both of those. Now, we talked about 550 cord. We talked about some kind of hammer type situation. I've seen guys use big giant rocks. Not big giant rocks, but rocks weighted. Obviously, they're weighted. You can use those to drive wood into the ground. Hopefully, it's not frozen ground. That's another thing you're going to have to determine if you're talking frozen ground or not. Having a shovel would be great. Coincidentally, the best shovel that I have seen, and I have it, is the Glock shovel. Have you seen the Glock shovel?
Oh, no. I was about to. I think that might be one of those things where like you go to Walmart and there's like a Smith and Wesson knife, but like Smith and Wesson did not make that knife. They paid somebody else to make the knife and they laser engraved the Smith and Wesson logo on it. The shovel that I have been issued, I talked about this the other day too. How over my time in the military, I've been issued 100 multi-tools. Over my time in the military, I've been issued 3 or 4 shovels, and I think the one I have, I actually think I've been issued a Gerber shovel and a Glock shovel, and I think they're the same. So I think it's the kind of Smith and Wesson knife situation where it's probably the same factory that's cranking them out, but one of them says Glock on it, one of them says
I don't know.
Because the shovel itself is the same, but the little pouch thing that it goes in, I swear I think I'll have to look, but one of them says Gerber and the other one says Glock, but the shovel itself I think is the same.
There is the Glock trenching tool, as they call it.
Yeah, so mine is the only difference. The one I have, the handle part on mine looks like a triangle, and one edge of the shovel is like a blade. Yeah.
One of the other things that we can get back into on part 2 of this is obviously if you have paracord and you can bring paracord, great, but there are different things that you can use in the wild, in the wilderness, for lashing, if you will. Videotape is not one of them, but there are other things that you can use or you can manufacture, I guess, if you will, or fabricate when making lashing. So there's a lot. There's a lot to this.
This is one of the like super basic like military things that we do is when you're issued your boots, you immediately take the laces out of your boots and replace your laces with 550 cord. So, so if you get into a situation, you at least have that. But
yeah.
What are the? Are we wrapping up? Because
no. I mean, I just like as we're sitting here going through this, and I'm looking at some of our show notes, and I'm like, we can go into this a lot more in depth because we haven't, like, we've talked about some of the stuff that involve or surround building a shelter, but not some of the things on how to build a shelter. But go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, I was just going to make the point, like, this is one of the few examples, really, because I definitely do not recommend this with firearms related things, but this is one of the things that I actually would recommend. Watch the TV show Alone. Watch the TV show Survivor Man. Maybe if you run out of other stuff to watch Man versus Wild, but watch what they do on TV and then go out and try to mimic it, because one of the things that I've said, this applies to everything. It applies to shooting. It applies to ice skating. It applies to bushcraft. Like, if you watch a YouTube video or you watch something on TV and it looks very easy, it's because that person is really, really good at it. Yeah. So whereas Les Stroud, I really, if in case anybody doesn't know, I really like Les Stroud. I have a lot of respect for him. I've read his books. Sometimes people ask that question, like, "Oh, if you could have dinner with any 5 people, who would they be?" Like Les Stroud would definitely be at my dinner table. I really like what that dude's about. But anyway, he and it's in one of the, I think it actually might be in season 1 of Survivor Man. He has just like a basic Leatherman. We've talked about him before. There are some very, very specialized Leathermans that are made, but he just has like the kind of the basic regular, like Boy Scout Leatherman, I would say. And those basic Leathermans have a little saw blade in them, but it's about the size of your finger. And it does work, but it does take some elbow grease and stuff. But anyway, Les Stroud, like, cuts firewood and makes a shelter and all this stuff, and he uses just like a basic ass Leatherman tool. And of course, the TV show is edited down so it fits into a 42-minute time slot on on TV. But watch those things, pay attention, and then go out and try to do it. I guarantee you're going to learn something. You're going to learn that it's not as easy as it looked on TV, but maybe you will learn the technique on how to do it. If you see somebody on the TV show alone, if you're watching alone, and they're like Chris was just saying, they found some kind of tree bark and they braid it into cordage, go try that, because it's not as easy as it looks. But this is one of the few times that I would definitely suggest watch some of this stuff on TV and on YouTube, and then go out and try to mimic what you saw.
Yeah, agreed. Definitely. As always, our time together goes by really fast. I know that it goes by fast for Jamie and I, because there's probably 3 or 4 phone calls that happen before the show. We put the show together and we have multiple conversations, and they turn into be about, in total, 3 hours. And then we try and get the show down to a reasonable time. But that's why I think in this situation, this will likely be a part 1, and a part 2 will come. It may not come for a couple of months, because I feel like there's some trial and error testing and evaluating that can happen here, whether it comes with saws, or whether it comes in the form of attempting to create a couple of things here during the camping trips that happen over the next couple of months. So we appreciate you guys spending some time and tuning back in for our second episode. We hope that you gained a little bit of information that's useful on today's show, and please provide any input in the comments section below, or obviously on YouTube, or whether you're just listening on Spotify or Apple. But we love to hear that kind of information. So until next time, folks, you guys stay safe out there. Jamie?
I always say it's easy to be hard, it's hard to be smart. And I'll give a quick example that reemphasizes the last point I just made. One of my friends went out, and I think he actually did watch the Bear Grylls show, and in one of the episodes of Bear Grylls, he illustrated how to heat up. You get your fire going, you heat up some rocks, and then, like, when you lay down to go to sleep, you can tuck the rocks around you, and the rocks that you warmed by the fire will keep you warm. Without trying that technique in a controlled environment, one of my friends went camping with his wife. And they got caught in kind of an unexpected winter storm, and it became really cold, like colder than they had prepared for. And so my friend said, well, I just saw this on TV the other day, and so I'm going to try this. And so he heated up some rocks by the fire, and then, like, brought them into the tent, and then, like, they went to put them inside the sleeping bag, and because the sleeping bag material it melted through the sleeping bag material and created, like, basically like hot melted plastic. And then the types of rock he used, first it melted through the sleeping bag, and then the rock fractured and, like, kind of like split, and, like, exploded isn't the right word, but, like, kind of. And anyway, it ended up causing, like, very, very severe burns and injuries to the insides of his wife's legs. And they ended up having to, like, race to the nearest hospital in the middle of the night after trying one of these techniques that looked cool on TV. And he either did it wrong, or it's maybe the takeaway is that it's not really a valid technique, or something like that. But it's easy to be hard, it's hard to be smart. So, train, practice, learn, and
be smart.
Yeah, don't be dumb.
All right, folks. You guys, until next time, ZP002.